Now, the first world is not immune to crisis, and there are two major instances that I do want to bring up, particularly for the United States. First of all, the Red Scares, what's also known as McCarthyism. The Red Scare began in the early 1950s under Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy claimed to have a list of names of confirmed communists who worked in the U.S. government and who were intent on bringing down the United States. And there is definitely some cause for concern coming from the public because they've just witnessed from 1945 to 1950 the trials. I think it's the Hindenburg trials. I can't quite recall the name. But individuals who were working on the Manhattan Project, which would have been the atomic bomb, were actually accused of spying for Germany or spying for the Soviet Union. And because this was such a major breach of protocol, which could have sold out the United States to its enemies, there is definitely an awareness within the United States that enemies could be anywhere. And so the Red Scare isn't just what's produced by McCarthy, but it also filters into all elements of society. This total fear of communism, bomb drills were not uncommon. Children, I don't know if any of you have actually done this, but when I was in school, there were tornado drills, and I think they still do this. And for a tornado drill, basically what they had the students do was crawl underneath their desk. Well, that's exactly what you would do for a nuclear attack, and that's what those drills were. Now, obviously, that desk wasn't going to protect you from anything, but it really indoctrinates the young people that this that there is this fear out there. There is some enemy that is willing to destroy you, and you constantly have to be on your guard. Blackouts, things like this were not uncommon through the 1950s. Now, what the Red Scare ends up doing is actually blacklisting a number of individuals, and eventually McCarthy begins turning towards the Army, claiming that there are individuals in service to the Army which could actually end up selling out the United States. And so McCarthyism is really in reference to the tactics that McCarthy used. He never really confirmed who was on the list. The numbers tended to change dramatically depending on depending on the situation. But what was noted is that this was not a calm investigation. This was fear mongering. And that's really all it came down to. He's basically playing on individuals' fears of the Red Scare. And so individuals were turning against their neighbors, against their friends for no other reason, no reason based in fact, other than the fact that they were scared they might be a communist. And so why should you trust them? McCarthy was eventually discredited. Television footage of the trials against the Army, his investigations, basically brought down the fact that he was incredibly pompous, he was rude, he was irrational, and the public eventually began to distrust him. Now, there were a number of actresses, artists, individuals in the entertainment industry which were actually put on this list and who were blacklisted. Eventually, they were given a pardon by the government. One of them was Arthur Miller, Marilyn Monroe's first husband. And the Red Scare McCarthyism is actually what encouraged him to write his play, The Crucible, about the Salem witch trials. He researched it and he said that there was such an enormous similarity to what was happening in the United States during the 1950s under McCarthy, that this Red Scare, that people were turning against each other out of paranoia and as something that was completely abstract. The other issue I want to bring up is the civil rights movement, the social movement to outlaw racial discrimination against African Americans in the United States. And so this is a century after the end of the American Civil War, which outlawed slavery, but as we saw, that the end of the war, while it definitely outlawed slavery in practice, it did not eradicate racism. It did not totally recreate racial relationships in the United States, but in particularly in the South. And so, what the civil rights movement is doing is it is a driving force over the emphasis on the true equality in the United States. And it's a fundamental shift in how American society now functions. The fact that integration is going to now be mandated in schools. And it's not going to happen nicely. The fact that college students, high school students, elementary school students have to be escorted by the U.S. Army for their own protection indicates really how dire this situation has become in the South and how individuals do not want to move forward. Exactly how deep these racist attitudes are. So the letters you're going to be reading from the Mississippi Freedom Project demonstrate just how unequal American society was in the 1960s, a time that we think as relatively progressive. And when you're reading that, I want you to think about exactly how the United States, who can claim that it's trying to protect democracy at all costs, can actually sit by and watch while this sort of massive widespread discrimination and violence can occur against its own citizens.